This is Research Like a Pro, episode 205, Proving to Parent-Child Link Using Ancestry Thrulines, Part 2. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi, Nicole. How are you today?
Excellent. How about you?
I am doing well. Just recovering from having been in Sacramento for the National Genealogical Conference, which was so fun to be there with you and to see people in person. We really had a great time.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed the conference and I went on the clock. So now I'm working toward my 1 year of time to finish up my BCG portfolio.
That is so exciting and good motivation.
Yep. Like I have been saying for the last year that I'm working on it. But now that I'm on the clock, I feel like a rush. Like, oh, I can't do anything. I can't say yes to anything. I have to only do this. So it's giving me that push I need.
That's great.
I hope so. I'm excited to have that time to work on it. What have you been reading lately in your family tree problem solver?
Well, I have been reading the section on probate records and the discussion of the different people involved. So whenever you see someone in a bond or an inventory, the point was that they pretty much had to have been associates of the person. And we know that, but it's just always good to read it again, see some examples, and be reminded that anyone putting up the surety, that's part of the bond, is going to likely be a relative or a close friend. So it's always good to be reminded and get these things refreshed in our brains.
Absolutely. A great thing about that book is you can read it on Kindle, which is what I was doing on the airplane ride home from Sacramento. And I forgot that I had both that book and Genealogy Standards on my Kindle app on my phone. So I pulled that up and I was kind of reading and thinking about my portfolio. Like whenever I have a free moment, I can just read the standards. This is great.
Yes, the standards are so important for you and your portfolio. So you're going to have those memorized by the time you're done with this.
So true. Well, today our announcements are that we have the Research Like a Pro study group this fall, 2022, beginning September 7th, meeting every week for 9 weeks with one break during the week of October 19th for a little extra research time. And you can begin registering for that study group on July 20th, and the registration will wrap up on August 25th. And if you'd like to help us as a peer group leader, please go to our website and send us a report or a work sample. All right, so what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are talking about my study group project, which was proving a parent-child link using Ancestry Thrulines. And I'm using this to prove a long-standing parent-child link. This is something that has been there in the family tree ever since we started, and so I didn't feel a huge need to research the line all the way back. But now I've come to a point where I really want to use DNA evidence based on Ancestry Thrulines and documentary research to prove it. So my research objective follows. Using DNA analysis and documentary research, test the hypothesis that Martin S. Shults was the biological father of Hickman Monroe Shults. Martin was born about 1800 in Sevier County, Tennessee, and died in 1854 in Johnson County, Texas. He married Sarah Rowden on 24 December 1814 in Rhea County, Tennessee. Hickman was born on 13 June 1821 in Alabama and died on 12 May 1899 in Falls County, Texas. He married Rachel Cox on 4 July 1848 in Navarro County, Texas. So you can see we have a lot of dates and places, Tennessee and Texas, and Hickman and Monroe, in the records that I have for both of them, are not ever in the exact same place. So how do I know that they're really father and son? You know, there's some good indirect evidence, but that's why I'm doing this project. So, in part one of this series, I discussed doing basic clustering for my DNA test taker, Lucretia, using the leads method. And then I organized her DNA matches by diagramming the closest matches on the Shults line. And creating that timeline and analyzing the sources and the DNA matches followed. And with those steps completed, I had a great foundation for the project.
Yeah. You mentioned in the previous podcast we did about this, that you did the leads method for Lucretia and that clustering, but that you're also using a through lines hypothesis to kind of help you verify that this connection is correct between Hickman and Martin. So with the matches in the leads method, did you find that some of them were found in that through lines hypothesis? And so they were in the right cluster?
Well, my through lines was picking up matches below what I'd used for the leads method. I only went down to 90 centimorgans for leads method, and the through lines had the largest match was, I believe, about 40. So they were in a genetic network of people, but the specific matches were not on my leads chart. But it was great because I could check the shared matches and see that they were in this cluster.
Right. Did you add colored dots to her DNA results?
I had done some of the colored dots, and Lucretia had actually done some of the colored dots herself. So it was pretty easy to figure out where these people all went because some of them were my own cousins, and I already knew who they were and how I was related to them. So that always helps when you're sort of familiar with the matches.
Yeah, small families or less testigers. Well, so that was your first, that was your overview of the last, few steps. So the next steps after doing the clustering and setting your research objective were locality research and exploring ethnicity, exploring DNA tools, and then research planning. So using that exploration of tools to help inform your research planning and knowing, oh, I want to use this tool to help me figure this out, or these records are available in that location, so I'd like to plan to use them. So tell us about that locality research that you did.
Well, with my objective focused on proving Martin is Hickman's father, I reasoned that I needed to find proof of Martin's residence in Alabama in 1821, which is where everyone said Hickman was born, and that was the year. So I have an Alabama research guide, but I decided to learn about Bibb County, and that was a specific county that many online trees had. And I learned that Bibb County is located in the center of the state, and there was no courthouse disaster, so marriage, land, and probate records begin in 1816. This was great news for my research since the Shults family likely moved into the area once the county was formed in 1818. And then I also found a great map on the David Rumsey website that showed Bibb County, and at that time it was on the border of Indian lands. So the Creek Nation had ceded the lands that became Bibb County, that part of central Alabama, and then in 1832 they ceded the section of East Alabama. So it was good to see that when the Shultses could have been living in Bibb County, they were right on the border of the Creek Nation lands at that time in the 1820s. Now, ethnicity estimates also play a part in this lesson, and I spent some time analyzing Lucretia's estimate from Ancestry. And that showed all European regions. So she also has a variety of communities that cover states where the Shults family resided. And the featured matches were those I'd already identified as matches on the Shults line. And the suggested communities correlated exactly with Martin Shults' migration path from Tennessee to Arkansas to Texas. So that all made sense. So that was fun doing the locality research and ethnicity portion of the project.
That's good to know.
Well, when I was looking to explore some DNA tools, I had previously used the leads method of separating Lucretia's closer matches on Ancestry into genetic networks, and we talked about in the first part of this series. And because I already had a genetic network from through lines for me to test, I didn't feel the need to spend a lot of time working with other tools for creating genetic networks. But I did make a list of some things that I wanted to think of for future projects. And so some of those are Genetic Affairs Auto Tree, MyHeritage Auto Cluster, and GEDmatch Tier 1 tools. Because other projects I might need to dig a little bit deeper, I may not have an Ancestry Throughline that I'm using, and so those are always good tools to use. Also, just to pick up other matches on other websites. For working with the segment data, I revisited the chromosome map on DNA Painter that I've been working on for several years, and currently I have 207 segments painted and have attributed 46% of my genome to some ancestral couple. So it was fun to revisit that and look at all the segments that I share with Lucretia, and I've colored those dark blue. And what I'm really hoping is eventually I'll be able to take pieces of those larger segments that belong to ancestors further back in the pedigree. So right now I know that those segments at least come through our shared, her grandparent, my great-grandparent, William Houston Shults, and his wife, Dora Algie Royston. But of course they inherited those pieces from others.
That makes sense.
So if you're interested in seeing a snippet of my chromosome map on DNA Painter, you can just go to the blog post that's associated with this podcast and see how much I have actually got completed on that. And actually looking at it made me want to go back and see if I could paint some more.
Great. So the next step was research planning. So since you already had this group of matches from Throughline to evaluate, what did you decide to do for your research plan?
Well, during the research planning phase, I created 2 tables summarizing the known facts about Martin and his hypothesized son, Hickman Shults. So I did one for each man, and I took the information from my Airtable timeline and distilled that into 3 columns. So one column was date and event, one locality, and one was the citation. And then I formulated my working hypothesis. It's always amazing how when you take your information out of your timeline and put it just into these succinct tables, which is what I like to do for the summary of known facts, it helps you remember everything that you know about them, and you take the most specific and relevant facts. So my hypothesis became this. Here's what I wrote. Martin Shults was born between 1790 and 1800, probably in Tennessee. He married Sarah Rowden, then moved to Alabama, Arkansas, and finally to Texas, where he died. His son, Hickman Monroe Shults, was born about 1821 in Alabama and also moved to Arkansas and Texas with the family. Verifying Martin's residence in Alabama by 1821, when Hickman was born, would add validity to the census record stating that birthplace. Authored sources on Ancestry online trees give Bibb or Perry County, Alabama, as the residence of the Shults family. Hickman lived in Navarro County, Texas by 1850, as did his probable mother, Sarah Shults, and brothers Martin and Wade. A land record of 1857 names the heirs of Martin Shults as Sarah T. Shults, Martin V. Shults, and Paulina K. Hoggard. These are most likely some of his children. Hickman was not named, perhaps because he'd already received his own land patent. AncestryDNA Throughlines show many DNA matches for descendants of Hickman Monroe Shults and his probable siblings. Verifying the trees, the documentary research, and the amount of shared DNA will provide evidence of this relationship. So that was my hypothesis.
Fantastic. I like that in your hypothesis, you kind of go over the timeline and the place and time where you're hoping to find, Martin Shults in Alabama in 1821 when Hickman was born. And that's great that you had a land record with some of the heirs of Martin Shults and that those, probable siblings were showing up as probable siblings in the Throughlines hypothesis. So you had a lot of good stuff there.
Yes, I did have a lot of good stuff. And because the research needed to focus on Bibb County, I first did a list of possible records that were in Bibb County during the 1820s, and then I prioritized those that could prove Martin's residence in the early 1820s. And I also prioritized some DNA work. So if you look at the blog post, I have a screenshot of my research project document that shows my strategy, and I like to add little check boxes that can be marked when I complete a step of the research, and anything that I don't complete during the research phase can go into future research. And I think that's always something really good to think of, that just because we put it in our plan doesn't mean we always are going to actually do that piece of research. Sometimes our plan goes in a different direction, and that's okay.
Yes.
So my prioritized research strategy for documentary research was first to take a look at the court records in Bibb County, Alabama. There was an authored source on Ancestry that stated that Martin Shults was listed on a Bibb County, Alabama jury on February 1819 with Kinnison, Shults, Martin, Haggard, and Nosh Haggard. So there's those Haggard surnames again. And so I found that there was actually a published record or a published abstract of the court records up at the Family History Library. And so I had planned on doing a trip there and figured that that would be a really great place to start, would be a published abstract. So that was number one. And then I also had another book that was by Family Search about court records. Then some county histories that looked really interesting. I always want to learn about the very beginnings of the county. And a Wiley Boyd ledger, which was a medicine and medical practice ledger for this Dr. Boyd, was also a published source at the Family History Library, and Boyd was actually cited in one of the authored sources for the Shults family, so I wanted to check that because that sounded fascinating. And then I wanted to check some church records, which were digitized on Family Search, and I thought possibly, the Shultses could have been Baptists in Bibb County, which was the denomination. So that was my list of documentary sources.
And two of those, you had a clue that from an authored source that you should look there. So that's a really good research plan.
So I also had to come up with some DNA tools or a plan for the DNA tools. And so the first thing I wanted to work with were the Ancestry DNA Thrulines for Martin Shults for my main test taker, Lucretia. So I decided I would identify the matches with the largest segments and enter them into Airtable. And then I also have some other test takers that are descendants of Hickman, Monroe, Shults. And so I wanted to create a matrix for them as well and see the amount of centimorgans they shared with Lucretia's best matches. So I could get a nice grouping of people and show this genetic network.
Yeah, that's actually a really important step, I think, because you have beyond one test taker, you have two other test takers who are on the Schultz side of the family. So, in essence, you're ensuring that these matches who are in the through lines hypothesis are in the right genetic network by checking to see if they also share with other people who should be, in that network too, because you know, they're known cousins that you have gathered their DNA from that Schultz side. So, if someone's doing this with just one base test taker, like your own matches, and they're looking at through lines and they haven't checked to see if they're in the right genetic network, there's a chance that those people could be, related to you on a different side of the family, but they're just picked up by through lines because it's just looking for people with that person in their tree. So you have to be really careful with through lines to make sure that, my article on our website about evaluating those through lines hypotheses is a good thing to just check if you're using through lines, because you never know. Like, it could be that it picks up a match who's actually related to you on a different grandparent side. But since you're using multiple test takers who you've target tested or gathered their DNA who've already tested, then you can verify it that way.
That is absolutely right, which leads me to my second part of my research plan, which is to verify online trees for the identified matches. So another thing we really have to be careful of with through lines is verifying the trees that are being used. And through lines will kind of jump around between different people's trees trying to connect people, and so you've got to do your own research. So that was important in my research plan. And then I also have a Gephi network graph that you did for me for Lucretia, and I thought if I have time and if I feel the need to, I could also find the identified matches and look for connections to other clusters perhaps more distant. And so, I put that in there. I probably will not get to that. That might be for a future project, connecting perhaps Martin Schultz to his father, going back a generation, trying to find more distant clusters. But in a nutshell, that was my research plan.
Yeah, another good thing to do with that Gephi network graph is just verify that the people you chose from through lines are in the genetic network of the Schultz family. So that's another great thing you could do with that.
Well, with this research plan all completed, I was really excited to get to start doing the research. It's always fun to get to the point where you can do the research after doing all that planning.
Right. And this is a pretty short research plan. And I think a lot of times people think that it's required to make a really long list of 10, 20 things you want to look up in documentary records, and then, have all these ideas of things to do with different DNA tools. But keeping it simple is really important because you need to keep it a manageable project size so that you're able to write up your results in a report without it taking you like another 30 hours just to write it up.
Right. And I did want to focus just on Bibb County in the 1820s. There's obviously so much more I can do with this family, but I needed to focus in on something really specific for this project, and that felt like the best place to focus.
Right.
So, yeah, our plans need to be pretty succinct.
Yeah, I mean, you did the basic clustering with the leads method. Then you found some matches through lines. Then you're checking them. Your plan is to check to see if they match multiple people who are on the Schultz side to see if they, are in the right genetic network. So, another thing to think about is you don't always need to use any DNA tools really beyond what you have in the company that you're using, the DNA match list. If you just do the leads method, that's that's like a methodology. And then another methodology that a lot of people use is just looking at shared matches. So not every project requires you to use a third-party tool or something.
So this was a project where just using the trees and through lines should give me a nice body of evidence. And every project's a little bit different, and especially with DNA, different tools and things that you'll want to use.
And you had mentioned DNA Painter, and that is just such a helpful tool when you're using any of the sites with segment data. So I love that one. Well, great job sharing your research plan. And next time we'll talk about your research log and the results you found.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at FamilyLocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at FamilyLocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.